Welcome to the What is Smart podcast, brought to you by the Gardens Foundation. I'm Garrett Wilhelm, your host. This podcast dives deep into the ever-evolving world of intelligence, learning, and success. Join us as we engage with leading educators, psychologists, technologists, and thinkers unraveling insights and challenging old notions. What is Smart? Your guide to understanding intelligence in the 21st century. Let's embark on this journey of discovery together. Hello, everybody. My name is Garrett. I am the founder of the Gardens Foundation, which sponsors this podcast, What is Smart? I know you're thinking at home, Garrett, I need some of that What is Smart merch. Well, we finally have it. And if you want to check it out, you can go to our website. It'll be here on the video podcast, www.thegardensfoundation.org. You can go buy your shirts and support our initial project, Global Pathways, with Johns Hopkins University. We're super excited. And speaking of super excited, my friends, today we have an awesome guest. We have a team of people in the background, in the van of the espionage situation, finding amazing people across the world that can speak to what future learners need to know. And today is no different. Today, we have Mr. Paul France, and Paul is an accomplished educator and thought leader in the field of education with a wealth of experience as a national board certified teacher, I said it, literacy specialist, and adjunct professor. Paul brings a unique perspective to his work. He is the author of over 40 publications, unbelievable, including notable titles like Make Teaching Sustainable, God, Please Make Teaching Sustainable, and Reclaiming Personalized Learning, something that I'm super interested in. So thank you so much, Paul, and welcome to What is Smart.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No, I'm super excited to have you. And the one thing I did want to start with is, and we'll get into your origin story because I think that's really important, but reclaiming personalized learning. It means something to me. As soon as it hits me, I could tell you what it means to me. But what does it mean to you?
Oh, I'm so curious what it means to you, but I'll tell you what it means to me. So ever since I started teaching, and I think most teachers grapple with this, right? What keeps us up at night is the kids we didn't reach, right? The ones that we just feel like we missed during the day, or the ones we feel like we made mistakes with, And I think most teachers struggle with that because we get into this work because we want to help, we want to support, we want kids to love learning, right? And when you have kids in your class that don't love learning, or you have kids in your class that don't feel smart, or you have kids in your class that like just aren't succeeding in the ways that they want to succeed, or aren't feeling good about themselves, it does keep you up. It creates a sense of guilt, And I think that's where, for me, this journey with personalized learning started. I wanted ways to reach all kids in my classroom. I wanted them to all feel seen and heard and valued. And I also wanted to make sure they had the skills necessary to go and pursue what they wanted to pursue someday and be successful in the ways that they wanted to be successful. And so originally, I think I took a very academics-based approach to personalized learning and thought, and I think some of it was deficit framing. It was like, what don't they have that I need to give them so that they can succeed? And a lot of that took the form of academics, like reading, writing, math, etc. And so my pedagogy for personalization was very technology driven. It was about finding their just right level and giving them content or activities that aligned with what the gaps were that the tech said they needed and that sort of thing. And so for the first, 5-6 years of my teaching, personalized learning to me meant using tech to individualize instruction. And it actually brought me out to San Francisco. I was working for an education technology startup company, a network of micro schools. We were opening schools dedicated to personalized learning. And we were building this thing called a playlist. And our hypothesis was, if every child has their own playlist that's individualized to them, that has activities within their respective zones of proximal development, that we will then personalize learning for them and solve the challenges of achievement gaps and all those sorts of deficit framing, all that sort of deficit framing language. And what I realized two things. I realized that this technology-driven approach to curriculum individualization was not only unsustainable, even with tech, right? Even with tech, it was unsustainable. I tried it. for 3 straight years, and all in 3 different classrooms at 3 different schools. And it just was unsustainable. I could not keep up with it, and I had only had eight. I think the biggest number of kids I had to create playlists for was around 18 to 20 kids, I want to say. And teachers have way more students than that. Like teachers have, like in your average public school setting, right? Way more kids than that. And so if it's unsustainable for me in this environment where I've got a whole team of engineers backing me up and there's like a bunch of money behind this and everything, like it's not going to work for the average teacher if it's not going to work in that setting with that level of support. So there's the sustainability element of it, but there was also this humanization element of it, that
That's
when
right.
we have kids turning towards screens more than they're turning towards each other, we're actually no longer learning, because learning is an inherently human behavior. It's an inherently social act, and kids need to be learning in community through each other, through dialogue, through discourse, through inquiry, right? And that I felt that the tools were sort of taking away from that. And so this idea of reclaiming personalized learning means reclaiming it from big tech and instead making it a pedagogy for pursuing equity and a pedagogy for humanizing our teaching, as opposed to, you know, drowning ourselves in tech. And that's like a 30,000 foot view. That is why I called the book Reclaiming Personalized Learning.
Oh, I need to let that absorb into me because I guess podcast over, guys. Good night, everyone. No, I'm kidding. Well, to be honest with you, we kind of went through a similar learning journey, I think. And what isn't being said is the company that we all had fun with at that time. I thought it was a joyous experience from my, you were on the
Yeah.
ground actually working with these tools and helping to develop them. But separately, we worked with the same company. And I had a very similar thought process, which was, wow, this tech is really amazing. I believe in this tech, right? This tech could really be game changing for learners. However, the cadence, the rhythm that is required for a teacher to build is not only complicated, it's nuanced. And with all that gray area of ensuring that everyone is getting this same personalized experience, this same playlist, and that the child has agency in that requires time from the educator to sit
Oh, yeah.
down and work. And that human time, I can speak from seeing the classrooms myself, is so challenging when you're also having a business model attached to it. To make it make sense business wise was almost impossible. And then if that be the case, looking at a public school system to adopt these is going to be even harder. And I knew the founders' kind of ideas around how that would scale down. It just didn't happen fast enough. And so I think we kind of, for me, reclaiming personalized learning is much more about creating, as you've said, and even the work we do with the Gardens Foundation. We've determined that the best route to that is human centric, is side by side. With tech, of course, assisting, but looking at it much more around not tech driving the learning, the educator driving engagement, the learning happening in between that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. What comes to mind for me, um, there's a book called The Empathic Civilization by Jeremy Rifkin. It's a very, very, very thick book, so I only recommend reading it if you like boring kind of social science type stuff, which I can nerd
I
out on
do.
sometimes.
Yeah.
But he describes technology, and when I say technology, I'm using that term very generally. I'm not just saying digital technology. I'm saying like even a pencil or the printing press, was innovative technology at some point in history, right? He says technology is supposed to be a means for empathic extension. So it's this
Mm,
idea that like we're seeing outside of ourselves, right? And you hear this a lot now with tech, right? That like tech makes the world a smaller place because you and I can have this conversation from far away, or we can collaborate with people halfway around the world without really having to think about it anymore, right? So like that's a great example of how technology, digital technology, has actually made us a lot stronger, and it is serving that purpose of empathic extension. I'm able to get to know other people and learn from their experiences when they're not right next to me. And that's something that would not have been possible 100 years ago, or would have been really, really hard to do. We need letters and you need lots of time, and now we can do it instantly. And so that idea has sort of it guides me now because I'm not. I think sometimes when people read my writing, or at least some of my past writing on tech, they think I'm like anti-tech, and I'm not at all. It's just that I've seen the disadvantages of becoming like education technology maximalists, where it's like the more tech, the better. When actually, what we should be doing is we should be ed tech minimalists, and that doesn't mean just cut it out for the sake of cutting it out. It means being really intentional about what we're using, the purpose we're using it for, and ensuring, to your point, that humanization is front and center in our intentions for incorporating education technology into our classrooms. And this is especially true with children, right? We don't want them growing up, with deficits because of too much screen time or because, they're just too inundated with tech, which I think a lot of parents experience currently.
Yeah, I think to your point, one of the things that we had Dr. Damian Bevel of Boston College on, who did the initial one-on-one study of how iPads affect literacy in
Mm.
classrooms. This guy fascinated me, and what he said was really to your point, is we keep adding things tech-wise to a learner's experience, yet we fail to take things away. So
Mhm.
now all of a sudden we have all of these tools with no guidance on how to use them effectively or time to give children the opportunity to understand what is effective for them. Because the way you work, Paul, and the way I work are probably fundamentally different. I'm
Right.
kind of obsessed now with Trello because of alt school, you know what I mean? Like that was you just worked out of that, but that's really the only thing that I can like. Other than that, my creative process is my creative process. I build stuff. Yours is yours.
Yep.
And I just think overall, for an experience for learners in the classroom, it's like pick the best stuff and use that. But I love the idea of minimalist technology because these tools, as they get more and more refined and crazy, I mean, talk about the AI buzz of when you had, I'm sure, your first GPT experience. Now, actually, that brings up a great question, Paul, is
Yeah.
with GPT, the onset of that, thinking about what could have been possible 10 years ago in the work we were doing,
Mhm.
do you see yourself having an advantage on the perspective of what is being built now,
Hmm.
over someone that had that initial GPT experience? Because initially we were talking machine learning and how powerful that could be, but
Yeah.
there was this kind of shift. Do you feel like you have a I wouldn't say a better, but a broader perspective on that based on the experiences from the past?
Maybe. I don't even know if I would say it's broader. I would just say that I've tried a lot of things with digital tech in the classroom, and I had the privilege of being able to work with engineers and like actually build things for the classroom. And so it taught me a lot about design and intentionality and the limits of tech, limits of digital tech, right? So my perspective on it, and it's funny you bring this up because I feel like I've been talking about AI so much lately, and I really don't know that much about it. Like
Right,
I think that there are some use cases where like if you're a new teacher and you have a student who comes into your classroom with, like really significant trauma and you know nothing about trauma informed teaching, you could go to ChatGPT and say, please give me, the 10 most authoritative articles to read on, trauma informed teaching. The student, obviously without using name, the student is exhibiting these behaviors. It might give you some ideas of where to start, right? And it might be a more
right.
effective tool than using just like regular Google, right? I think where I so when I was working in San Francisco and I was working with engineers, I remember engineers, and God love the engineers, their ideas and like they're dreaming of new possibilities. I love it, right? Um, but they would pose things like using AI to grade, or one engineer one time said to me, they're like, wouldn't it be really cool if we could just like take Paul, like because Paul's such a good teacher, and he was trying to like make me feel good, which I guess was nice. But anyway, he was like, don't you think it would be really cool if we could just take Paul and then like replicate Paul, and then everybody could get Paul? And I was like, no, no,
Yeah, exactly.
I'm confident in my abilities as a teacher, but like, I also know that we benefit from having lots of different types of teachers in the world, right? Like there's all this
Right.
research on, if black kids have a black teacher by the time they're in third grade, they're more likely to be successful later on in school, right? Like having people look like us and have our experiences, I'm gay and like, God, I would have loved to have a gay teacher growing up. That would have been probably just transformational for me. So no, I don't want to be replicated. Like I don't want, and that's what I fear in these conversations. It comes up in grading a lot too. And they're like, well, wouldn't it be great to have AI grade for us? And I'm like, well, I guess it depends. It's not a yes or no. It depends. And I think people should be free to explore this in a really mindful way that doesn't have detrimental effects on kids. But my experience with the playlist software was, I was inputting so much data and it was draining me. And so I see the use case there for like, let's use tech to make it stop draining me. But I remember I went to the engineers and I was like, I'm just curious, because I was teaching kindergarten and first grade at the time. And I was like, I'm just curious,
Awesome.
how many data points have I put in? And this was December. So, school starts in September, it's December. How many data points have I put in? And the engineer was like, she sent me a download of every data point, like the spreadsheet, whatever, every quantitative score and comments and all this stuff. 7,000
Narratives.
7,000 data points on 20 something kids. And I shared some of those kids with some other teachers, so they weren't all for all my kids, but 7,000 data points on that many, on then 20 something kids. And I was sort of like, whoa, that's a lot of work that I did. But then I looked at what data I put in. I'm like, none of this is actually helpful for me right now. What was
Amen.
helpful was me going through the process of assessment so that I was getting to know my kid better in the moment. And that's like a national board thing. National board, knowledge of students, knowledge of students, knowledge of students. Well, how do we know our students better? We know them better by assessing. And I don't mean cold hard assessment. I mean, like if you look at like actually the root of assessment, like etymology of assessment, it means a sitting by. It doesn't mean a categorization, it doesn't mean a ranking. It means like, so I take that as I'm sitting next to a student and I'm getting to know them while they're also building a conscious knowledge of self through learner-driven, humanizing assessment practices. I don't think AI is going to give us that. I just don't. Now, I don't have the training around AI. I am not an engineer, but just what I've seen so far, I just don't think that AI is going to give us that. So so that's my perspective. I wouldn't say it's broader. I wouldn't say it's better. I wouldn't say it's more expansive. I would just say like, that is the experience. That's a lived experience I have that's informed this opinion. And am I totally open to changing my mind? Absolutely. So long as we're experimenting with AI in a way that is not going to have detrimental effects on kids.
Yeah, and I don't think, to your point, is you can't say, okay, Paul, we're going to recreate you in an AI experience,
Yeah.
except for this kid, it's going to be Black Paul. And this right-wing Trumpian is going to be straight Paul. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, I grew up with a gay dad, so I can very much relate if I had that
Yeah.
experience in my life. And I always think like the eccentric life that I lived growing up in DC, early 80s, early 90s, gay scene, right? Of just, I always joke because like people weren't just out, they were out and doing crazy. And so I can relate to that in the sense of feeling less than because of having that experience. Because my dad would show up I always tell this story in fourth grade, he showed up on rollerblades with like super tight bike shorts and a cropped shirt. Now, mind you, this is 87,
Yeah.
88. And everybody looking at me cross-eyed. And now I look at that experience as some of the best in my life because
Yeah.
it gave me such an empathy, talking about empathy with learners, to such a broader spectrum of life and love. And so I think going back to this kind of human experience, we talk a lot about this in the work that we do because in order to even if we come up with in our research the best example of what, the future learner is and what, quote unquote smart is, implementing that on the ground is going to require that educators feel different about how their educations or how they're delivering education, if you will. And we know that it's going to start with professional development. We know that it's going to start with teacher education in order for them to have more of those meaningful experiences and learn how to use, not necessarily learn how to use specific tools, but understand frameworks that help them identify what tools work for them. And so I know a lot of what you do is professional development and, consulting with other educators. What have you found is the best approach to that? When you're looking at an educator that's been set in their ways and you're saying, let me show you something new and let me have you feel it. You see what the difference though is? Like, I can do a professional development and go, this is this and that is that and this is that. Or I can actually be human to human and have meaningful moments. How do you craft those for other educators?
Yeah. I mean, I say this to principals, superintendents, when I'm talking to them about crafting professional learning experiences. I'm like, I can come in for a day if you want me to, and I can talk at them for 6 hours if you really, really want me to. But I can
Talk
tell
at
you
them.
that, right, well, right. And that's what a lot
Right.
of professional learning really is. And I think when you put teachers in a room for 6 hours, like how much can you really get done and how much can you really shift practice in one day? Like you really can't. And anyone who tells you that you can, I don't think is being honest with themselves about that, or they're not collecting data rigorously enough to see the impact. Like in order to shift practice in schools, teachers need sustained job embedded professional learning experiences that are asset based, right? That are validating the things that they're already doing, because part of what has made teaching so unsustainable is attitudes towards teachers and the ways in which we as a society make teachers feel in schools. Teachers don't feel respected, they don't feel valued, and they don't feel validated for the efforts are putting forth in their schools, especially given the very extreme constraints they're under with regard to time and resources and just like their emotional and physical bandwidth. It's a very demanding job, and it's why people don't last very long in it. So when I go in, there are times where I do full day workshops. I don't really recommend them. I'd rather, like, if we're going to do a full day, I'd rather do like workshop style where we have, an hour to 90 minutes together. And then I'm meeting with teams I'm meeting with teams one-on-one. When I say one-on-one, I mean me to each team.
That's
But
right.
the most effective means for professional learning, I think, is to have a sustained model that's over the course of the whole year. So there's a couple ways that I do that. First, if I'm just working with teachers individually, my question is always, what problems can I help you solve in the classroom? Because I want to help make your life easier. Now, I don't want to help make your life easier just for the sake of you doing less work. I want to help you be more efficient and effective so that like you're taking less home and you're feeling less run down by this. Meanwhile, we're amplifying the practices we know are best for kids. So both those things have to exist together. And I say if it's, sustainable teaching is something that's good for kids and it's good for teachers. And if it's not sustainable, it's not best practice. And I find that messaging and it's genuine. I genuinely mean that. And I think teachers see that because I practice what I preach. Like I don't model practices for them that I feel like are unsustainable. And I don't about practices that I feel like are unsustainable. And I find that authentic messaging coupled with modeling what I'm saying helps teachers see like, okay, like this guy actually cares about my sustainability. So there's that approach to it. But I also think more professional learning models should be grounded in authentic inquiry, and we should be building capacity in teachers to ask questions, generate hypotheses about teaching, and then test those. And so I do that through lab school models, and it's been so fun. For the last 3 years, I've been working with 2 schools in Kentucky, and like we've been building we've been building like infrastructure for lab schooling. So we're not like building new schools, but we're putting processes in place to
Love
help
it.
teachers be curious about specific research themes and specific essential questions. And then those affect, like we do instructional rounds where people go around to classrooms and they're looking for the look fors in relation to the essential question. We have teachers doing lab lessons where they're trying a new tool or a new strategy, and I'm collaborating with them on creating that tool or like thinking through that strategy. And what it does is it democratizes professional learning. And now I'm not the person that's coming in and going, well, I know everything there is to know about personalized learning. And so I'm here to tell you everything I know, and you're going to teach just like me. Because if I do that, there's going to be a critical mass of teachers that are going to be like, this guy sucks and I don't want to work with him, But when you come in with that mentality of like, hey, I want to learn from you too, and you have to do it genuinely. Like, I genuinely feel that way. I genuinely feel like I don't know everything there is to know about personalized learning, and I never will. And so I want to learn with you. I want to learn through your lived experiences, and I want to make sure this works for your population of kids, right? Like when I did personalized learning work at alt school, I mean, right? Like a lot of those kids were very affluent. Parents well resourced, good for them, right? But that's a totally different experience than working in an inner city school or in a high
Totally.
poverty school, or and so I'm like, I have a bias, I have a lens, and it's limited. And so I'm here to be a thought partner and to build capacity and to create space for inquiry and risk taking and mistake making. And you can't just say it, you got to lead with it too. So like I conduct lab lessons and I get feedback from teachers. Like I want them to see me putting myself out there too. So I think it just necessitates sort of a shift in how we see ourselves as people who are facilitating professional learning. Like I'm not necessarily the person who knows everything there is to know about this topic. I'm here to help facilitate conversations. And that's my superpower as a facilitator.
And that's ultimately what you want to see in the classroom, right? And that is so magical, talking about a democratic experience. At the schools that I own, I always joke with people coming in for tours because I go, typically at a school you get a binder. That binder has pretty much everything you're going to do for that year, and then you get to be creative in the words that you use, and maybe you can add a project or something. For our educators, they're creating it and sharing it and collaborating, and dare I say teaching, because like you said, that process of the scientific method, if you will, as a Montessori educator myself, that was embedded in me. Teaching is this kind of test, iterate, test, iterate, test, iterate. And it just seemed natural. But then when I started working in a broader approach, developing a broader approach to learning, you start working with a lot of folks. I work in early learning, so it's like childcare and working in daycares and things like that. And you're saying, this is going to be complicated, guys. Part of that experience, you have to really, one, value, I think, and this is leading somewhere, value the learning that goes on with those types of, from a childcare environment, the care, the education that they bring, while also saying, hey, why don't we try this and that and this and that? I found it to be extremely challenging, working with folks that were so disconnected from that experience. But the point I'm trying to make is, we do see at the Gardens Foundation the future being professional development programs that are designed for this co-creation, for this ability to go side by side and say, what do you need to be better at? And how do you want to get there? I think asking more questions than making more statements is such a powerful thing. But it sounds to me like that's what you've been doing. Now, let me ask you, Paul, what's your age range? Like school wise, what are you working with right now?
Oh, like in terms of kids?
Yes.
I thought you meant teachers for a second. I was like, I don't know how old the oldest.
No, like lab schools, and you're working with lab schools to design these, but like what is the area of work that you're doing?
I'm elementary by trade. So like most of my work is elementary. I have
Good.
a handful of high school teachers I've worked with and a few more out at middle school, but like most of my consulting work and coaching work up until this point has been in elementary spaces.
Yeah, and I think the reason I ask that is I feel like that's where the biggest gap is. Kids, for the most part, and even in inner city, socioeconomically diverse communities, coming out from decent programming when it comes to early learning, because
Hmm.
somewhere along the way, care and education is different than just education. I think that's where we miss, is we go from care and education in an early learning environment to just educating and not caring, if that makes
Oh.
sense, about that disconnected experience of, like, for me, I lost my dad to AIDS at 15, and I was a really great student. And then you look at 15, and then I really wasn't a great student.
Hmm.
Yet no one took the time to say, and this is where that side by side learning comes in, that human connection. No one took the time to say, this kid just lost his dad to a virus that was brand new, that affected, and his dad was gay in a time where things weren't as accepting and still aren't. And God, anyway, we could have a whole other discussion on that,
Yeah.
and gone backwards there. But how that affects someone's learning and experience in the classroom, that experience motivates me to this day, because I do think that, we've lost that care. We've thought about what is going to make our district money. How are we going to do this so we can get the nicks, we can get the whistles, we can get all these fancy things, never train our team on how to properly use them, and just waste with superintendents getting $500,000 salaries? I mean, it's insane. But speaking to that, how do you see it happening? And this is a big question. So again, no right answers, but how do you see that shift happening? I definitely think the pandemic has pushed us forward in learning a new way, talking about personalized learning and reclaiming personalized learning. Personalized learning is a buzzword across the country, right, in classrooms. What it looks like in the schools, however, for the most part, I live in Loudoun County, where it's one of the richest, if not the richest county in the country. They called personalized learning Schoology and laptops in their classrooms. So how do you see this shift happening at scale? How do we see this actually moving forward rather than the great work that we're all doing in silos right now?
Yeah, that is a very big question. First of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad. Um,
Yeah, it made me who I am today, man. Thank
yeah,
you.
I understand, but it's still tough.
Yeah.
Um, so I think this sort of connects back to the last thing we were talking about, right? And I think it all comes down to incremental shifts in practice. Like I know we have those like dreams of the silver bullet strategy or tool, right? That's going to just completely shift education overnight. I just don't think that that is sustainable in and of itself. And that what we have to do is help teachers build the capacity of teachers to really see and know kids um, in a more expansive way than we're used to thinking about, than we're used to seeing kids. And what I'm trying to get at when I say that is, the ways in which we define success in our schools
Mm,
colors what we do. It colors, it impacts how we get money in our schools, right? I think also if you're looking from a public school lens, right? Things like property values impact how much money schools will have, right?
zip codes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you're in a neighborhood where property values are lower for whatever reason, that could be because of current conditions, it could be because of it could be because of policies, almost a century ago around redlining, right? Like
That's
that could
right.
be why property values are low, right? And that is no one's that is no one's fault who lives in that community, right? Like that is because of policy that they're just experiencing the after effects of, right? So I think it in order to like navigate that shift, I think it has to be incremental, but I also think we have to change the way we're measuring success in schools. And I think we have to keep this idea of humanization front and center because the industrialization of teaching and of the education system at large is not working. right? If it was going to work, it would have started working in the 80s and 90s
That's right.
when the standardized testing movement really took hold. And like it shouldn't take this long for something like that to work if it's going to work, right? And I think what we find, right, is like that way of managing education works for predominantly affluent communities who have access to either resources or funds to give their child a really well-rounded experience, right? But when you don't have access to that, if it doesn't work for everybody, it doesn't work, you know?
So true. So true. Very well said.
And so I think it is, but the challenge here, right, is like you and I can sit and and have a discussion about this, and we can intellectualize it a little bit, but until policy actually changes in our country, I don't think we're going to see the type of broad shift that we want to see, which is why I focus on incremental shifts, and it's why in the sustainability conversation, I'm always asking teachers, like, we can talk, or I'm saying to teachers, we can talk about the broad range of issues that make teaching unsustainable, but of those, which are within your locus of control? As a coach, I can't impact how much you're paid. As a coach, I can't impact your schedule right now, like tomorrow. I can talk with the principal about it and relay that feedback to them, but I can't impact that tomorrow. So what can we impact today? What can we change today? How can we work within these boundaries, but like do something a little different so that things are a little more sustainable, or so that learning feels a little more personalized? And a really concrete example of this could be, great, I mean, I'm a big standards guy. I think standards are great if they're used in a humanizing way, and if you use them in such a way that it's like clarifying learning for kids. But some teachers are like, I got to use standards-based grading. It's like, okay, well, you have to. You work here, so you have to do that. We can't change that. But how could we take a standards-based experience, right, and make it a little more personalized? Could be something as simple as like, you got to teach narrative writing. You've got to teach these standards, and you got to use this rubric. But it's not telling you that every kid has to write like a personal narrative about their summer vacation. It's not saying that, right? You could turn this into a really open-ended narrative assignment where like some kids could write like a fantasy story and some kids could write a personal narrative. Like helping teachers be a little more flexible with their mindset, and helping them yeah, I mean, that's really what it is. It's like helping them be a little more flexible and seeing that there are some options there.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think it all lies, is those incremental shifts in practice that eventually, like, if you've got a bunch of teachers incrementally shifting their practice, it's like ripples in a pond, and all of a sudden you've got waves. And that's how I envision it.
And I love that because, you know, I think the most powerful educators are those that have the ability to see at the macro and also the micro, be able to craft a professional learning structure for educators, but then also know what Timmy, in some school somewhere struggles with dyslexia and how to connect with him because he likes Paw Patrol. You know what I mean? Like, those are the really powerful educators to me. And those are the educators that, in my opinion, need to be leading these types of shifts. And because you have the current community, one of the problems in the current community that we talk a lot about on this podcast is ego, right? Is the inability to detach from how they do things. I always joke that a lot of educators, don't like change or the way things are. So that, you're kind of stuck in this never-ending complaining cycle. And so it is challenging, speaking from personal experience, really showing one, I think, because I think it needs to root in the magnitude of the job, right? You're the only job out there for the most part that has so many different aspects to it. You're a therapist, you're a this, you're a that. I mean, we've heard this kind of diatribe before, but to actually get them to understand how important that is. And I think that the only way in which to do that is to focus on, and again, this is my kind of personal opinion on it, focus on connection, focus on embracing and celebrating the diversity that actually makes meaningful connections that we learn from. We don't learn from echo chambers. We learn from difference. We learn from failure.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, needs to be the root of any of these programs, is folks like you, I think, have the macro micro, so I'm sure you're able to connect with people better. It's almost like we need to search across the world to find folks that have equal parts like implementation ability and also the empathy and compassion that it takes to really feel what these learners are feeling, to understand, to your point, their pain points, and then how to craft experiences that relieve those pain points in some minute way. But I do think there's like a cool aspect that needs to happen alongside of that, is like, not only do we need to find those people across the country, but we need to make it cool to be those type of people. And that could be money, but that could also be other things. We wear Nikes because of the brand, not because they're a better shoe. It's like we almost need to make personalized learning its own brand,
Mm.
and sell that. Which I was sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say part of the problem with personalized learning is that there just really isn't a clear definition of it. And so people are like, and people think personalized learning means individualized learning, and teachers go, there's no way I'm touching that. I can't do that. Right. But I did want to go back to something else you said before, because you mentioned this idea of the ego. And I think that's so important in reaching anybody, right? Because like the function of the ego is to protect us,
That's
right? So
right.
we like, and in order to, and I'm saying this as someone who has a very rich trauma history, and like I've been through a
Ditto.
lot of therapy, and like, and I'm learning, even at 35 years old, I'm learning like the things I do to protect myself in my everyday life, when I actually don't need to protect myself. And so I'm applying that to teachers and teaching, right? Because I do think teachers have this sort of collective trauma around being teachers. Like we're mistreated regularly, right? Like it's a reality, right? And I say that because in order to reach teachers, right? Like it is compassion, it's empathy, and it's understanding that when a teacher's resistant, it's not because they just woke up one morning and went, I'm going to be resistant to this because I just want to be a pain in the butt to my principal and I want everyone to hate me. Like,
Yeah.
that's not why they're doing that, right? Like, especially the more seasoned teachers who have been around for 20 or 30 years, they have seen the infamous pendulum swing, right? And they've burnt themselves out hanging on to that pendulum for dear life. And so they are protecting themselves right
Mm.
now at this very moment and just trying, like, I knew a teacher who was in her 50s who she had heart issues, and she actually had a heart attack, and she was like, I know that part of this is because I am so stressed at school because of all the stuff that's coming down the pike. And so she resigned, like she retired early because she was like, I would rather not have another heart attack than stay another 3 or 4 years or however long it was and get X amount more in my pension, right? And so I think when we look at teacher resistance through that lens of ego, I'm so glad you said that word, like of ego. And it's, to me, ego isn't like I just have an ego. It's like an ego is protecting me. Teachers feel like they have to protect themselves, and that's not their fault. That's the system's fault, and that's our society's fault, right? And we have to talk about that, and we have to validate that in teachers before we're going to be able to connect with them. Because like in order for a teacher to learn with me, their guard has to start to come down a little bit at least.
That's right. And I think the ego is it is a mirror to insecurity,
Yeah.
right? Ego pops up, talk about therapy, trust me. You just heard a little minute introduction into my life. But anytime you feel challenged with something new, right? I learned this at alt school was the SAMR format, talking with Dan Barber, a really, really smart guy. And the first step in that is uninformed pessimism. And so you're kind of working off this negativity already. But when someone's afraid like that, the immediate response, and they're only afraid because they feel less than, it's that imposter syndrome.
Mm.
And not necessarily because they're less than, it's only because these things challenge their ideas of, and this is the pivot right here, what is smart? And so that being said, I think the work that you're doing is fascinating around professional development. It's something that I didn't see as the key initially, but as I've done a lot of this work, talking with really amazing humans just like you, that is definitely the key, because it's only going to shift if that happens. Because part of the problem, I always say in my schools, ego is the great destroyer of real education. and that it will destroy pretty much any aspect of it. And when you have public school kindergarten teachers, at a conference flexing how quickly they can get their kids to line up and flexing how quickly they can get their kids to be quiet last year, that's the problem. The problem is, hey, why don't you make like the solution then, make your classroom a little bit more like the real world and give them the ability to craft that environment. I just think that is the absolute key. I definitely think that you would agree in the work that you're doing. But I have to ask you as we wrap up, I always think a great podcast is a drive home, right? So 30 to 45 minutes, we always like to keep it that so that there's more to talk about at the next one. I have to ask you, Paul, given your experience, given our shared experience in a lot of ways, we ask you the title question. What is SMART? It's another big one.
So, because I knew you were going to ask this question, and because I am a self-proclaimed word nerd, I went into the etymology dictionary online to look
Love
up.
it.
Have you ever done that?
No, and this is a very unique take, so I'm super interested to hear.
I'm gonna share this, and I'm sort of just gonna open the door because I am actually I'm gonna think out loud with you because I'm trying to rectify this right now, and I'll send you the link when we're done here, and we can maybe even put the link in the show notes or something if people want to look at it. Or you can just go to etymonline.com and look at up SMART. But we'll put it
right here.
So it says it comes from the Middle English smerten, which means, and this is the farthest back you can, or actually not the farthest back yet, but it means to cause pain or to suffer pain. And every etymological definition of SMART is somehow related to pain. Like it says harsh, injurious, unpleasant. There was a usage of it in 1718 that was fashionably elegant. Ascending from the kitchen to the drawing room. I don't know. Or I guess it's in some way related to sharp. So it's just I like to do this because not necessarily because the etymological definition is what it means to us now, because we know language evolves, right? And we know that like connotation of words changes over time. But
that's right.
You can get a little bit of insight into like how a word came to be used. And so to me, like if we were to maybe we should write a book together called Reclaiming SMART. But like
write that down, Eva. Flip that.
I mean, to me, like SMART, I actually really try not to use that word. I do use it sometimes still. But to me, like someone who is, when you're smart, it's really about like your dexterity, right? Like your flexibility. It's like your ability to like read a room, know and understand people, like to connect with people, right? Like I think someone who is really smart is someone who can do that. And I actually think that when it's like someone who can connect, right? And when we frame it in that way, I actually think it makes SMART accessible to everybody, because as humans, we are naturally, to call on Brene Brown's work, like we are naturally hardwired to connect with one another, right? And if we operate from a place where we believe that everybody can be smart in that way, right? Then all of a sudden our work becomes, well, how do I create pathways for everyone to shine in their smartness, as opposed to smart looks like this, and you have to be like fast at math, or you have to be a really deep reader, or you have to be a prolific writer to be smart. It's like, no, there are so many ways to, be smart and to connect with others through the things that you're passionate about. And I think that should be our work as teachers, right? Is like, how do we create those access points for everybody? And I think that ties right back into personalized learning too, right? Like my job as an elementary school teacher is to create an environment where every kid can feel seen and heard and valued and feel good about themselves and feel smart in their own way.
Amen. Amen. I think the connection there that I made was someone, even from the lineage of the word, someone that experienced the most pain is the most smart, because you're learning from those experiences. So I think that's definitely, I see that kind of connection of, how that word may be derived, which is, hey, this guy went through some shit. He's probably the smartest one of all of us.
Yeah.
And we've talked with so many people, smart is contextual and evolving. Smart is the application of knowledge in something that you love. All of which I think kind of centers around what we're thinking overall in general, which is, do we have like smart? I love that you think of it as a bad word in some senses, because that's kind of where it's leading to in my work is like, let's get, parents come to me on tours all the time and they say, my kiddo's so smart, where would you put this kiddo? Should they go a grade in advance? And I say, well, what is smart to you? Like, define that for me, because it's so subjective. I think personally, as I've talked with so many people, smart is all process, no outcome, right?
Mm,
So your learning journey, it's the journey in which you're learning. It's not these kind of factory outcomes, if you will. It's the reason why in innovation, we say this a lot on the podcast, we push innovation into our current system and evaluate how it works that way, rather than saying that's not the problem. Innovation is always going to happen. Humans by nature are innovators and tech builders, to your point.
yeah.
The true change, the true shift is to push innovation into a disruption of that standard system, right? Of talking about what is smart. And so it's amazing to hear your take on it, because you're spot on. I think it's a bad word. I think we need to move from, you're so smart to you're so, Terry, you're so Paul, and that's an awesome thing, you know?
And maybe it's not like, because I don't know, like I think Carol Dweck, right, who does growth mindset work, she would say like that smart, calling a kid smart operates in opposition to a growth mindset, because it's sort of it's painting it as this fixed mentality. And maybe instead of labeling the kid as smart, maybe it's like that was a smart thing to do, or that's a smart
Mm,
strategy, right? And that smart more so becomes, or could maybe become, once we reclaim the word in our new book,
I love it.
it could be smart could become a state of being as opposed to a fixed
That's spot
a
on.
fixed
I
characteristic.
and honestly, that's why I think like even in the shift towards what learning can look like, a piece of that is understanding or building frameworks. One, to have teachers, you said this earlier, have teachers understand who they are, right? Do a lot more mirror looking than pointing fingers. Take notice to the six that are pointing back at you. And then ultimately for our learners, I think that's why we use mindfulness in our schools as a way to manage difficult behaviors, because I believe discipline is a bad word. And in that practice, children automatically start thinking about who they are, how they show up. That's the sweet spot, because with that, everything I think comes after. It's like, if you're more aware of yourself, you understand what you're good at. If you understand what you're good at, you apply it better, or you seek that path earlier. So I agree. I think we should definitely write this book. In fact, it's coming out in 2 years. You can find it on all your local public. I'm kidding. Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate your time. I can't wait to chat again. We're having a summit with all of our guests, meaning virtually. We're going to get everybody in the same room under a couple of discussion topics, and we're going to start having those bigger conversations so that we can take it and write our book together, and also, of course, use the research for game-changing stuff. But I think the book and its profitability. No, I'm kidding. I'm a business person as well too. So thanks again, Paul. We look forward to hopefully having you back on the podcast, and also potentially working with you and what we do here at the
I
Gardens
love that.
Foundation. And yeah, check out Paul. Paul, let everyone know where they can find all your stuff.
Yeah, so my website is maketeachingsustainable.org. So you can get links to all my books there. I'm actually working on a new book on journaling, which I'm really, really excited about. It's supposed to come
Very
out
cool.
in January. Well, at least I hope it's going to come out in January. And then you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Sustain Teaching. And you can pretty much get access to me in any way through those three: my website or Twitter or Instagram. And I'd love to connect with everybody. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and a lot of educators watch this, so definitely reach out for professional development. That's so awesome. Thanks
Thank you
again,
so much for
and
having me. I
of
appreciate it.
course, we'll see you very soon, Paul. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks.